When I landed a job at Channel 9 News, I thought I had finally broken free from years of freelancing and low-pay gigs that kept me one step away from eviction notices and ramen. Noodle dinners, and for once, I felt like maybe my luck was turning around. The building itself didn't look like much from the outside, just a squat gray structure on the corner of 8th and Maple, more like an abandoned DMV than the local voice of nightly television. But when I pushed open the glass doors and walked across the scuffed lobby floor, the faint hum of electricity in the walls gave me chills. It smelled of dust, burnt coffee, and old cables. And for a second, I wondered if every newsroom smelled the same, or if this one had its own particular rot. I tried to push those thoughts away, telling myself this was my shot, and I wasn't going to screw it up. My first steps into the actual newsroom were almost overwhelming rows of cubicles stacked with papers and flickering monitors. The muffled voices of anchors rehearsing lines, the low static hiss of TVs, tuned to competitor. Stations, all of it creating a droning symphony that felt both alive and watchful. The man who intercepted me had the kind of presence you couldn't ignore. Tall, almost skeletal in suspenders that seemed older than me, with skin pale and paper-thin like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His voice carried strangely low and echoing, as though the room itself repeated him a half-second later. "Must be Terry," he said without smiling. "I'm Frank, night editor." He didn't offer a handshake, only pressed a press badge into my palm, and pinned through it was a piece of silver jewelry, a badge or trinket etched with the Channel 9 logo, though on closer inspection, I swore there were symbols under it. Odd curving lines like eyes and spirals hidden in the design. "Keep this on you at all times," Frank said, staring so hard I felt pinned myself. "Desk, bathroom, studio, even when you sleep. Don't lose it. Don't take it off. If you do, you won't want to know what happens." I thought he was joking, but his eyes didn't blink. I noticed then that every single person in the room had the same pin clipped somewhere, a lapel, pocket, collar, some polished bright, others dulled with years of wear. I felt like I'd been inducted into a secret club, but the kind you didn't actually want membership in. Frank's hand clamped my shoulder, strong enough that I winced, and he guided me toward the maze of corridors behind the main studio. As he walked, he didn't talk about deadlines, writing format, or equipment, the things I expected. He talked about rules. His voice dipped low, so low that I had to lean in to hear him. Over the droning of old computers, "First rule," he said, "when the red light above Studio B comes on, you stay away. Doesn't matter what assignment they give you, doesn't matter if it's breaking news, the president, or the apocalypse itself. That light goes on, you walk the other way." I gave a half smile and asked if this was some kind of newsroom hazing ritual, but Frank didn't smile back. "Do you think I'm laughing?" he asked, and my skin prickled because he wasn't. We passed doors labeled with peeling tape archive. Storage control 2, and every one of them looked like it had secrets behind it. The air grew cooler as we moved deeper, and the fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed with the kind of hum that made my teeth ache. Frank stopped at the end of the hallway, where a heavy steel door sat with a strip of faded red tape across it like a scar. The rectangular porthole was smeared from the inside, as if someone had pressed a greasy face to it. "That's the archive door," he said, his fingers tightening on my arm. "Rule number 2, you never open it. Not for me, not for anyone. If you hear knocking, you walk away." His eyes didn't leave the door as he spoke, and his voice took on the tone of someone replaying a memory they couldn't erase. "We had a guy, Elliot, graphics op, packed his bags in the middle of a shift, said he needed to go home. Everyone thought it was a family emergency, but he never went to the chopper pad. He came down here. He opened that door with all his things in hand. Nobody followed. Nobody dared. Next day, a black sludge seeped out, like oil mixed with old film chemicals, stank like vinegar and rot. Management told us to ignore it, said touching the door meant you'd lose your job. Took a week to mop up, a month for the smell to fade. Custodian found a ring in the Miss Elliott's wedding ring. My mouth had gone dry, and when I glanced back at the porthole, I swore I saw condensation forming there, like breath fogging. The glass. I wanted to laugh, call it superstition, but something about the way Frank's hand trembled against my sleeve made it impossible. What happens if I break the rules? I asked, trying to sound light. His eyes cut into me, hollow and dead serious. You won't last long enough to ask again. Just then, I caught a flicker of red at the far end of the hallway, the faint glow of a tally light above Studio B, winking on and off like an eye testing its lid. No one else reacted. No one even glanced. Frank's hand pressed harder into my shoulder, steering me back toward the humming newsroom. Don't look, he whispered. Just keep walking. That was my first day at Channel 9. Not exactly the glamorous start I'd pictured. No applause, no champagne, no cameras pointed at me. Just a pin clipped to my chest, rules whispered in my ear, and the growing dread that I had stepped into something I could never step back out of. Frank's tour of Channel 9 News didn't feel like a training session. It felt more like I'd been drafted into a cult with rules written in whispers instead of manuals. And as he guided me deeper into the maze of hallways behind the studio, I realized there was nothing normal about this. Job. The newsroom, with its clattering keyboards and low hum of TVs, already felt like a distant planet compared to where we were now. Here the lights buzzed weaker, the air smelled like dust and toner, and the paint peeled in strips that curled like burned paper. I asked him about the different departments, trying to inject some sense of normalcy. Where's the editing suite? Where do you keep the tapes? But Frank ignored me. Instead, he slowed near a narrow passage that ended in a single heavy door made of dented steel. A band of faded red tape stretched diagonally across it, brittle like dried blood, and in the center was a rectangular porthole smeared with an oily haze from the inside. I stopped short, unsettled by how out of place it looked, like something you'd find in a submarine rather than a newsroom. Frank noticed me staring and stepped closer, his hand gripping my arm tightly enough to hurt. That, he said, is the archive door. Rule number 2, you don't open it. Not for me, not for anyone. If you hear knocking, you walk away. His tone didn't leave room for argument, but I still tried to laugh it off, asking what was in there. Some kind of film vault. His face didn't move, restricted off limits. Don't think you're special enough to need to know. He paused. Then, like he was weighing whether to tell me more, and finally leaned in, his breath sour with burnt coffee. There was a guy before your time, Elliot. Graphics operator. Damn good at his job. One night, out of nowhere, he packed his things in the middle of his shift clothes bag. Even his pillow from the dorm's end, he wheeled it all right down this hall. Everyone thought it was a family emergency. But instead of going to the helipad, he walked right up to this door. My skin prickled. And did anyone stop him? Frank shook his head slowly. We couldn't. Management made it clear. Anyone caught touching this door would be terminated on the spot. Nobody followed him. He just vanished. He let that hang in the air for a moment before his eyes flicked back to the porthole. Next day, something seeped out from under it. Thick black liquid, like oil mixed with fixer fluid. The smell was like a morgue, and a printing press had rotted together. First it trickled, then it flooded. Got so deep it lapped at our shoes. Engineers tried to say it was a busted line, but you don't get magnetic tape floating in a busted pipe. Took us a week to mop it, and even then the stench clung for months. One of the cleanup guys found something in the muck. A gold wedding band. He finally looked at me then, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. It was Elliot's. His family got told he fell off the roof and drowned. But we know better. My mouth went dry. I glanced back at the porthole. For a split second, I swore I saw fog bloom across the glass from the inside, like someone had leaned against it and breathed. I took a step back, suddenly very aware of the cold sweat beating on my neck. So, what happens if someone opens it again? I asked, hating the quiver in my voice. Frank's grip on my arm tightened, his knuckles bone-white. Then you'll find out what happened to Elliot. And believe me, you don't want that kind of education. He let me go, but his eyes didn't leave the door, and his voice had that haunted tone. Like he wasn't really talking to me anymore, but reliving something he wished he could forget. For a moment, the whole building seemed to exhale. A low groan ran through the walls like shifting metal and the fluorescent tube. Above us flickered 3 times before buzzing steady again. I told myself it was just old wiring, nothing more. But the thought sat heavy in my stomach. We turned back toward the main corridor, my shoes echoing too loudly against the tile. And as we passed the branching hallway toward Studio B, a faint red glow flared in the distance. The tally light above the door blinked twice, slow and deliberate, though no broadcast was scheduled. Nobody else reacted. Nobody even looked. I slowed, my curiosity clawing at me, but Frank's hand pressed into my back and shoved me forward. "Don't," he whispered. "You're not ready." My pulse raced, my mouth filled with the copper taste of fear, and I couldn't help but think of Elliot. Dragging his suitcase to that steel door like it was calling his name, I clipped the pin tighter to my chest, forcing myself not to look back. The rest of the newsroom suddenly seemed safer, though I knew now that every hallway here had rules carved into it, and breaking even one of them meant I'd never make it out alive. The first night I stayed late at Channel 9, the city stretched outside the east-facing windows like a map of embers. Little orange dots scattered across the skyline, and for a moment I felt lucky, like I'd finally clawed my way into a life worth living, but that feeling didn't last long. The newsroom was quieter after sign-off, just a skeleton crew tinkering with edits and voiceovers, the kind of hum that usually makes a place feel safe, but I could sense a pressure in the air, the same way you can feel a storm before you hear thunder. I wandered to the glass to take in the view, thinking maybe the quiet would settle me, but as I looked out, the horizon rippled like water, as though the city itself was bending. Lights along the river bent upward into an impossible curve, and then I saw it, a wall rising out of the distance. Not fog, not smoke, but a wave towering, silver black, blotting out the stars, swallowing buildings, swallowing everything. My knees buckled, and my breath stuck in my chest. "Frank," shouted, my voice cracking. "There's a wave." He was already there, somehow his hand on my shoulder before I even turned. His grip was like iron, pulling me back, spinning me away from the glass. "Rule number 3, he said, low and steady, like he'd said it 1,000 times before. "After sign-off, never look into the east windows. It lies." My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about? I saw it." "It's a tsunami. It's going to hit us." He didn't even glance at the glass, didn't move a muscle except to squeeze harder. "If it were real," he murmured, "you'd be saltwater by now." His calm made me feel crazy. Struggled. Tried to push him toward the window so he'd see, but he didn't budge, not even an inch. His voice sharpened, just enough to cut through me. "Don't look east, Terry. Ever. That's the rule." Ah! I froze, and in that moment the weight of the building seemed to lean against my back like the glass was breathing. My eyes watered with the urge to turn, to prove I wasn't insane, but his grip didn't allow it. "You'll see things here," Frank said, softer now, almost like he pitied me. "Things that don't make sense. They'll use your eyes too. Get in. That's why we've got rules. You follow them, you'll survive. You'll break them, you won't." He made me repeat them right there, in the empty newsroom. Always wear the pin. Stay away from Studio B when the red light is on. Never touch the archive door. Never look east after sign-off. My voice shook, but I got the words out, and only then did he let go. My shoulder throbbed where his fingers had been. I tried to laugh it off, tried to sound like it was superstition, old-timer paranoia. But my laugh died when I noticed the TVs along the back wall, all tuned to different networks. One of them flickered not the newsfeed, but static, white snow breathing in and out. For a second, in the blur of it, I thought I saw shapes, a mouth opening too wide. Eyes pressed against glass, hands waving as though underwater. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by a cheerful weatherman pointing at a storm front. I wanted to ask Frank what I'd seen, but he was already walking away, muttering that I should get some rest. That morning would come fast. I stood there, sweating in the cold glow of the monitors, staring at my reflection in the east windows, without daring to turn my head. The city looked normal now, calm and unbothered, but I couldn't shake the image of that wall of water blotting out the sky. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I was already cracking under the pressure of this place. As I finally tore myself from the glass and followed the echo of Frank's footsteps down the hall, I heard it the faintest sound, like dripping like water pattering onto tile from very far away. I told myself it was just the AC unit or a leaky pipe. I told myself a lot of things that night. But when I reached my dorm room and shut the door, I noticed the bottom edge of my press badge glistening as though something wet had touched it. I wiped it against my shirt, heart hammering, and clipped it back to my collar, whispering the rules to myself again like a prayer. They had me Shadow Master control for the first time that week. A graveyard shift scheduled during a maintenance window. And I remember thinking it was going to be boring, just color bars, test patterns, maybe a chance to catch up on scripts. While engineering fiddled with circuits, but when I stepped into that room, I realized boring wasn't something Channel 9 ever offered. The consoles hummed louder than they should have. The air was warm and stale, smelling faintly of dust and ozone, and the racks of equipment glowed with little red and green lights that seemed to pulse like heartbeats. Engineers in stained polo. Shirts moved around silently, and I mean completely silently. Not one word, not even when a monitor blew out in a flash of sparks that made me flinch. They only used hand signal snaps on the console, a pointed finger, a quick snap of the wrist. I almost cracked a joke, asked if we were pretending to be mimes. But Frank was right behind me, pressing 2 fingers to his lips before I could speak. His other hand slashed across his throat. "Rule number 4, he whispered, so low I barely heard it over the hum. Don't talk during dead air. Not a whisper." At first I thought it was about professionalism, maybe superstition, but then the broadcast cut, the feed went to black. And something happened that I can't explain without my skin crawling even now. The room itself seemed to groan, as if the walls were a throat clearing itself. Tone rolled through the air, low and deep, not from the speakers but from everywhere at once, vibrating the floor under my shoes. It rose and fell like a whale song, heavy enough to thrum inside my chest. My first instinct was to ask, "Do you hear that?" The words already on my tongue, but before I could, Frank's hand clamped over my mouth so hard my teeth dug into my lip. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, terrified, and that scared me more than the sound. The tone swelled, impossibly loud, until it felt like the air itself was going to split me in half. My ears screamed, my molars buzzed, and white sparks popped in the edges of my vision. One of the engineers, a tattooed guy I'd never met, looked up from his console with blood running from his nose. His lips pressed shut like they were sewn. Together, he tapped his pin twice with his forefinger, and the others echoed the motion, a silent ritual, a desperate prayer. My lungs burned under Frank's grip, my body thrashing against him, but he shook his head in tiny, desperate movements, eyes begging me not to make a sound. The hum built to a knife-edge screech that went beyond hearing, piercing my skull. And then, like a curtain snapping close, it stopped. The room sagged into silence, except for the normal fan noise, the usual clicking of cooling circuits. The lights steadied. The equipment looked ordinary again. I slumped against the console, dizzy, bile sour in my throat. Frank removed his hand at last, wiping his bloody nose on his sleeve like it was routine. No one else looked up. I just went back to work as if nothing had happened. My voice finally broke free, hoarse and shaking. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, though my chest still felt like it was vibrating. Frank didn't look at me, just stared down at the console readouts. "That's why we don't speak," he said flatly. "The carrier hears. It remembers your voice. Once it knows you, it never lets you go." Wanted to press him, wanted to scream at him to explain what that meant. But when I glanced at the engineers' faces, pale eyes hollow, hands still tapping silently on their pins, I knew I wouldn't get any answers that night. We finished the maintenance in complete silence, my heart pounding louder than the machines, and when we finally stepped back into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us felt like relief, like air after nearly drowning. My hands were shaking so badly I shoved them in my pockets so Frank wouldn't. "See?" He didn't say a word until we reached the newsroom, and when he did, it was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "If you want to last here, Terry, you'll learn to hold your tongue." Then he walked away, leaving me staring at the monitors, wondering if the walls still remembered the shape of my voice. By Wednesday, I thought maybe I'd gotten used to Channel 9's strange rhythms, the hushed silences, the whispered rules. The haunted looks exchanged like currency, but then I walked into the newsroom and saw a memo taped to every cubicle wall in bold. Marker. No right. Right. Right at first I thought it was some inside joke or protest against budget cuts, but then I noticed the interns moving desk to desk with a tote bag, confiscating anything crimson pins, highlighters, post-its, even a lipstick someone had left on the corner of the assignment desk. The pile of red bled together in the bag like contraband. Frank slid me to blue Sharpies and said, with the same grim tone he'd used when warning me about Studio B, rule number 5, "No red on Wednesdays." I wanted to ask why, what the hell could the color red possibly matter, but when I saw how the others avoided even looking at the confiscated bag, I bit my tongue. Instead, I followed Frank toward the kitchenette. And that's when I saw the interns again, this time wheeling out a large rolling bin lined with thick black bags. Inside the bin wasn't just the pile of office supplies. I saw coils of magnetic tape from old reels, shredded copies of scripts, ruined overlays from the graphics department, and even a mannequin head from the promo closet with its painted lips chipped away. Every so often, one of them would drop a frozen cut of meat into the bin, pork chops, sausages, a whole leg of lamb straight from the freezer, and each time they did, the surface of the bag rippled with something black and liquid. The smell hit me next, sharp and chemical, like developer fluid mixed with rust, and for a moment I thought I'd gag. A manager with a clipboard ticked off each item like it was part of a sacred ritual. When I asked Frank where they were taking it, he just said rooftop. The way he said it, low final, made me want to stop asking questions. Still, curiosity clawed at me. For what? I pressed. His eyes flicked to me, tired, empty, and he said only one word: balance. The day crawled after that as if everyone was holding their breath. The anchors went through the motions of a city council presser. Sports guy cursed under his breath when a clip corrupted, and then apologized out loud to the room as if someone invisible was listening. The weather feed glitched with static for 5 seconds, and everyone froze until it stabilized again. At lunch, the cafeteria served chicken fajitas and bean chili. Nothing redder than salsa, but I noticed when someone asked for ketchup, the cook refused and pushed the tray back like they'd just requested poison. By the time dusk painted the east windows black, a line had formed at the supply closet, staff exchanging red markers for blue, like addicts getting their doses. In the lobby, a Cub Scout troop arrived for a feature, and I watched the receptionist carefully pin Channel 9 logos onto each of their chests, moving slowly, deliberately, avoiding anything that might count as scarlet. The scouts giggled, clueless, but the receptionist's hands trembled like she was defusing a bomb. When I asked Frank what happened if someone slipped up, his jaw tightened. "The signal stains," he muttered, "and the signal stains back." That was all he'd say.
Oh.
By then, I'd learned that explanations weren't gifts here, they were traps. So I swallowed my questions and walked the halls with my blue Sharpie in my pocket, pretending not to notice that the black bags had vanished from the bin and that the elevator smelled faintly of rust and meat. That night, as I sat at my desk trying to focus on rewriting a City Hall segment, I heard a sound from above, heavy, dragging across the rooftop, followed by something wet splattering against metal. I froze, pen tight in my hand, while the others kept typing like nothing was wrong. My curiosity almost pulled me to the stairwell, but then I remembered the way Frank's eyes had gone blank when he said balance, and I forced myself back into my chair, whispering the rules under my breath. No red on Wednesdays. Don't ask why. Just survive another day. The first time I heard the 3 tones, I thought it was some kind of test, like the emergency alert system, but the sound that rolled through Channel 9 that night was nothing like those high-pitched squawks on television. It was deeper, heavier, like a church bell submerged underwater. Bong, bong, bong. It shook the air inside my lungs and made my teeth ache. I was down in the editing bay, fighting a losing battle with a corrupted clip, when the tones rolled again, vibrating through the floor. Before I could ask what was going on, Frank appeared in the doorway, already pulling me by the collar. Rule number 6, he barked, his voice hoarse. When you hear 3, you go to the safe rooms. He didn't give me time to argue. We ran. Up the stairwell, past the cubicles, where anchors and interns were already abandoning scripts mid-sentence, spilling into the halls with wide eyes and stiff movements like sleepwalkers. I saw one reporter shove her laptop off her desk, the screen shattering, but she didn't look back. Everyone moved with a practiced urgency, all heading in the same direction. My chest burned as I kept pace with Frank, his long strides dragging me along until we stopped at a heavy steel door with a glowing keypad. People pressed in behind us, panicked, but orderly in the way prisoners might line up for roll call. Inside, the safe room was colder, walls lined with shelves of water jugs, cots folded against the far wall, and fluorescent lights that hummed with a sterile calm. But what caught my eye first was the inner door itself, the side that faced us when the operator pulled it shut. It was carved, etched, maybe burned into, with markings I didn't recognize, symbols that looked Egyptian at first glance, but wrong somehow, twisted. There was a fish with too many eyes, a spiral of teeth, a snake with 2 heads knotted around a microphone. The longer I looked, the more the carvings seemed to shimmer, like they were wet. People avoided staring at it for too long. They sat, quietly rubbing their silver pins between their fingers, whispering words I couldn't make out. I spotted Clive, my roommate, slumped in a corner in his boxers, hair sticking up, but even half asleep he still wore his pin. He nodded at me with hollow eyes, and then looked away. Oh. The tone stopped, but then came the knock. It was faint at first, like someone testing their knuckles against the steel, but then harder, faster. A man's voice followed, muffled, desperate. Let me in, please. You can't leave me out here. The whole room froze. My blood turned to ice as I looked around, expecting someone to open the door. But instead I saw people shake their heads violently, whispering no, no, no. The voice outside grew frantic. I was asleep. I didn't hear the bells. It's not fair. I realized with horror that this wasn't a stranger. Was Keller, one of the camera ops. The guy I'd seen 100 times wheeling tripods into the studio. The operators near the door argued in hissing whispers, their faces pale with sweat. Hobson, the station manager, stepped forward and pressed his forehead against the seam of the door. Keller, he said, loud enough for all of us to hear. You know the rules? We can't open it. The voice cracked with desperation. Please. I've renewed 8 times. It got 2 kids. Don't let me die out here. His hands appeared in the gap as the operators hesitated, long fingers forcing their way through like claws. Someone screamed in the back of the room. Get back, Hobson snarled. We'll crush them, Keller. You hear me? You know what happens if we open it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was a coworker, a human being, but the others nodded grimly, murmuring agreement. I saw Hobson grab his walkie, slam it down on Keller's fingers, and the snap of breaking bone echoed through the vault. Keller howled like an animal, then went silent. The operator shoved the door tight, locking it. The silence that followed was worse than the screams. Then the building groaned, the floor rocking under us like a ship in a storm. People fell to their knees instinctively, clutching their pins. I followed suit as bile rose in my throat. Sound came next, the same deep moaning I'd heard down in master control. But louder now, everywhere, like the walls themselves were alive and crying. The etchings on the door began to move, the fish blinking, the snake tightening around its prey, the spiral opening into a mouth lined with teeth. My stomach lurched. I heard someone vomit behind me. The sound went on, until I thought my skull would split, and then it stopped as suddenly as it had started. The room sagged into silence again, people gasping for air. The carvings on the door froze, just symbols again, as if they hadn't moved at all. Hobson opened the door after what felt like hours, his face gray. Back to your dorms, he said flatly. Don't linger. We filed out like ghosts. I tried not to look at the hallway beyond, but curiosity betrayed me. There were smears across the tile, black and red mixed together, leading toward the east side of the building. Something was caught in the pipes overhead one of Keller's shoes. I swallowed hard, clipped my pin tighter to my shirt, forced myself not to think about how the knocking had sounded almost exactly like my own voice. I thought leaving the station for a week would give me space to breathe, that a little distance from Channel 9's rules and shadows would clear my head. But instead, every night on leave, I lay awake in a cheap room above a laundromat, staring at the cracked ceiling while the spin cycle below rattled the floor. And with each cycle, I swore. I could hear the three tones reverberating faintly through the walls, like they'd followed me. I considered quitting outright, packing up and disappearing. But the contract I'd signed had me in a chokehold, 3 months' worth of salary forfeited if I left early. Plus penalties stacked so high they might as well have shackled me too. The newsroom, when I finally returned, the building felt worse, taut like a drum stretched too tight. The laughter I'd once heard between anchors was gone. The only sounds were the mechanical hum of old computers, the occasional hiss of static from a monitor, and the shuffle of exhausted feet. People spoke less, but they drank more. Empty bottles of cheap whiskey and tequila started piling. Up under desks, tucked behind monitors, hidden in trash bins, even Frank, who'd always carried himself with a kind of grim sobriety, pulled out a flask one Friday night and poured amber liquid into 2 paper cups, sliding one to me. "You still remember the rules?" he asked, his voice thick and ragged, like each word cost him something. I nodded because of course I remembered. I whispered them to myself before I slept, like a prayer that maybe kept me breathing. He leaned closer, his pale face creased with exhaustion, and lowered his voice. "There's one more. Rule number 7. Everyone joins the sweepstakes." My stomach dropped at the way he said it, like it was both a confession and a curse. I tried to laugh, to break the tension. "What is this? Some kind of station party? A raffle?" He didn't smile. His eyes were wet, tired, defeated. "End of ratings. Company tradition. You show up. You stand where they tell you. You clap for the winner." The way he said winner made my skin crawl. "What happens?" "If you're chosen," I asked, before I could stop myself. His hand shook as he raised the flask to his lips. "Then you don't have to worry about renewing." His eyes flicked down to his wrists, to a shiny oval of burn scar that caught the fluorescent light, and I didn't need him to explain. I wanted to push him to demand the truth, but the exhaustion in his face silenced me. Looked like a man who'd carried secrets too heavy for too long. That night, as I walked back toward the dorms, I passed Studio B. The red tally light was on, glowing steadily, though there was no live show scheduled, no crew inside. The glow washed the hallway like blood. Rule 1 screamed in my head, but I couldn't stop staring. The glass window into the studio was dark, yet I thought I saw movement inside, like figures shifting just beyond the light. My chest tightened, and I clipped my pin hard against my shirt, repeating the rules in my mind until my legs finally obeyed and carried me back to the dorm. Lying in my bunk, I realized I hadn't unclipped the pin since the day I arrived. Slept in it, showered with it, ate with it, because Frank had been right taking it off, even for a second. It felt like an invitation for something to notice me. As the building settled into its mechanical hum that night, I swore I heard whispers through the air vents, faint and layered, like a dozen voices reading my name. I buried my face in the pillow, clutching the pin until it bit into my palm, and whispered back the rules like a mantra. Pin always on, void Studio B, never touch the archive door, never look east after sign-off, don't speak during dead air, no red on Wednesdays, don't ignore the bell. And now, the one Frank had just given me, the one that made my skin crawl. Everyone joins the sweepstakes. The memo for the staff gathering arrived on a Friday afternoon. Printed on stark white paper and taped to every monitor like an unavoidable summons. Staff gathering, 9 p.m. main studio. Mandatory. Nobody laughed. Nobody even asked what it was about because apparently everyone already knew. The cafeteria went all out that night steak. Lobster. Baked potatoes piled high with sour cream and chives, but no one touched their plates. Forks scraped lazily at the food. Drinks sat sweating and untouched. And conversations never rose above murmurs. Even the anchors, usually the loudest, sat pale and quiet, glancing at the wall clock every few minutes. I forced myself to eat, though every bite turned to chalk in my mouth. At 8:58, the PA system clicked. On with a soft pop, then fell silent again, like someone breathing into the microphone. That was the signal. We filed into Studio A, the same place I'd stood earlier in the week while shadowing production, but it looked different now. It's bright under the harsh overheads, too still without the bustle of cameras and crew. Hobson, the station manager, stood center stage beside a bingo cage perched on a rolling cart. Behind him was a massive drum, waist high. The industrial kind you'd expect to see, filled with oil or paint thinner, its lid off, and a faint chemical shimmer glowing around its rim. The air stank of something metallic, something that reminded me of blood and developer fluid. My stomach twisted. People gathered in a wide circle, forming a perimeter around the stage. Their shoes squeaked on the polished floor as they shuffled into place, and though no one said a word, I could feel their dread vibrating through the air like static. Frank appeared at my side, his hand resting heavy on my shoulder, steering me toward the back of the crowd. His eyes were hollow, his face drawn tighter than I'd ever seen it. "Stay near me," he whispered. "Don't move unless I move." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The bingo cage spun, its wooden balls clattering like teeth. Hobson's voice crackled through the mic, calm and steady, but beneath it, I thought I heard another hum, like feedback, only alive. "Thanks for another quarter," he said. "Before we draw tonight, let's remember our commitment. The rules keep us safe, the signal keeps us fed, and the sweepstakes keeps the balance." A shiver rolled through the crowd at that word balance. My mind flashed to the rooftop bin on Wednesday, to the dripping black sludge and the smell of raw meat. Hobson reached into the cage without looking, his eyes locked on some invisible horizon none of us could see. He pulled out a ball, closed his fist around it, and brought the mic closer. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels intentional, like the room itself is listening, and his voice flat as stone. "Tonight's winner, Dev Malhotra."
Nice.
My stomach flipped. Dev, my friend, the cameraman who'd shared lunch with me, the guy who'd once joked about his pin being armor against office politics, let out a strangled noise to my left. The crowd parted without resistance as two crew members stepped forward, taking him gently by the arms. It's not cruel, not kind, just efficient, like this was something they'd done before. "It'll be over soon," Frank whispered to me, his voice ragged with something between fear and grief. "Think of the bonus, Terry. That's why we're here." His hand clamped tighter on my arm as though he feared I'd bolt. Dev struggled, begging, his words spilling too fast to follow. He locked eyes with me once, a look that begged for help, and my knees nearly gave out, but no one moved. Hobson gave a slight nod. And the woman from promotions, her smile always too wide during AD shoots, stepped forward with a ladle. She dipped it into the drum and pulled up a cup full of thick black liquid. Oily rainbows. My stomach heaved. Dev cried out as she pressed it to his lips and forced it down his throat. Gagged, choked, vomited it back up in great black streams onto the floor. The smell hit me like a fist chemical. Bitter, sour, crew. Members darted forward with brushes, scooping the vomit. Dipping it back into cups, began painting symbols across the floor. Spirals, eyes, teeth. The same etchings I'd seen in the safe room door. Only here, they glistened wet and alive. The circle closed slowly around us, trapping us inside its glowing lines. "Stay in the marks," Frank hissed, dragging me back another step. "If you step outside, you count." His words rattled in my skull. Dev collapsed, coughing up strands of tape-like filaments, his pin dangling uselessly against his chest. Nobody rushed to save him. The EMTs were there, but they stood frozen, waiting, their gloves untouched. The cameras mounted on their robotic pedestals whirred to life, panning across the room, framing Dev in perfect thirds. Teleprompters flickered on, scrolling with words not written by any producer. Live, feed, obey, return. Hobson smiled into the mic like an anchor delivering. "The nightly weather? Let's begin." The room exhaled, the air pressure shifting, and the painted symbols began to glow. My pin felt cold against my chest, biting into my skin. And for the first time since I'd arrived at Channel 9, I wondered if this whole building wasn't a news station at all, but something else entirely, a vessel. A mouth, a stage for something far older than local broadcasts. They didn't drag Dev like a prisoner. He walked, trembling, shoulders shaking, eyes wild, but he walked under his own power, as if some invisible string pulled him forward. The crowd closed in behind him, tightening like a noose, and I felt my own feet shuffle with theirs, even though every nerve in my body screamed to run. The woman with the ladle dipped again, filling another plastic cup from the drum, and for a moment the oily surface shimmered like an eye-opening beneath the liquid. She forced it between Dev's lips again, and he gagged, black streams pouring down his chin, soaking his shirt, splattering across the news desk until the polished wood ran slick with oil. He vomited hard, retching so violently I thought his ribs would snap, and when the slurry hit the floor, the crew lunged forward with brushes, dipping into it as if it were sacred paint. They moved with terrifying precision, spreading it across the polished linoleum in looping shapes that burned into my eyes, spirals that spun too fast if I looked too long. Fish with oversized eyes, coiled serpents swallowing microphones whole, they connected each line to the next, closing us inside a circle, each stroke brightening until the floor glowed faintly like it was wired with neon. I pressed closer to Frank, but he only muttered, "Stay in the marks. Inside is survival. Outside is offering." My chest clenched, bile rising in my throat, and still I couldn't look away. Dev collapsed onto his knees, heaving black strands from his throat that looked like spooled magnetic tape, wet and glistening as they piled beneath him. He clawed at his chest as if trying to rip the signal out of his lungs. The EMTs finally moved forward, but not to help. They stood behind him, watching, making sure he didn't stray outside the circle. Hobson's mic crackled with static as he spoke, calm, almost proud. "This is balance. This is continuity. We keep the feet alive." His voice bled into the overhead monitors, which flickered from black to static to something worse. At first, I thought it was just snow, white flecks swarming across glass. But then the static pulsed in rhythm with the sound of Dev's gagging. Faces appeared and the noise blurred, melting, screaming, hundreds of them crowding the screens like moths, pressed against glass. The soundboard lit up without anyone touching it, sliders moving as though pushed by invisible hands, faders rising and falling with the cries. Cameras rotated on their pedestals, framing Dev perfectly as if this were the evening broadcast. Teleprompters scrolled in symbols again, interrupted by English words that made my stomach turn. Live, feed, return. Dev screamed, a raw animal noise that shredded his throat. And the microphones hanging above caught every syllable, amplifying it until the walls shook. The painted glyphs glowed brighter, vibrating with his pain. And I realized with sick certainty that the ritual wasn't just about him. It was about all of us standing in the circle, our presence feeding whatever was listening. My knees buckled. As the floor tilted, the whole building swaying like a ship at sea. People around me rubbed their pins feverishly, whispering words too quiet to catch, like prayers rehearsed for moments exactly like this. I clutched mine so hard, the metal edges dug into my skin. Frank leaned into my ear, his voice a ragged hiss. "Don't move. Don't speak. Don't you dare look away." My vision blurred, and in the static overhead one of the faces sharpened. Into someone I knew killer. The camera op left outside the safe room. His mouth opened in a silent scream that matched Dev's perfectly. My stomach dropped. Were they the same voice now? The same feed? Dev's body convulsed, jerking against the floor, his eyes rolling white. But still the crew kept painting, circling him, closing the sigils with each stroke. The air tasted metallic, every breath like sucking on pennies. The noise from the monitors built into a screech, then a silence so thick it rang in my ears. For a moment I thought it was over. Dev lay still, oil pooling around him, his chest rising only faintly. Then the lights above flared blindingly white, and the symbols on the floor writhed, literally moving, pulling toward Dev as if the paint itself were alive. He screamed again, but this time it wasn't his voice. It was dozens. Maybe hundreds, overlapping, all spilling out of his mouth at once. Voices of anchors long dead, reporters whose names I'd seen on old plaques. Voices I couldn't place, but that filled me with a terror older than the building itself. The teleprompter scrolled faster. Contract, signal, balance. My body shook. So violently I nearly fell, and Frank's grip was the only thing anchoring me. "This is what the sweepstakes is," he whispered, eyes glistening. "Someone has to keep the broadcast going." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there while my friend was swallowed alive by cymbals and static, but my legs wouldn't obey. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth like glue. All I could do was clutch the pin, whisper the rules in my head, and pray I wouldn't be the next one chosen. The air inside Studio A thickened until it felt like we were breathing through wet cloth, every inhale coated with the chemical stench of oil and iron, and I thought I might suffocate before the ritual itself finished. But Hobson kept speaking through the mic, as if this was the most ordinary broadcast in the world. Dev writhed in the center of the circle, choking up strands of oily tape that hissed as they hit the glowing symbols beneath him. And each time he screamed, the lights above us pulsed in response, flickering in perfect sync with his agony. Painted glyphs no longer looked like paint at all. They slithered across the tiles like living veins, pulsing toward him in a slow crawl, tightening the circle into a noose of light. The static on the monitors sharpened into clarity, faces pressing outward from the screen as though trapped inside glass, eyes wide and desperate. I recognized some of them anchors whose portraits still hung in the station lobby, porters who'd vanished from Bialene's years ago, even Keller, his twisted mouth still forming that silent plea. They opened and closed their mouths in unison, and though I couldn't hear their words, I felt them crawling under my skin like a second heartbeat. The cameras swung to track Dev, capturing every convulsion with cinematic precision. Flashing commands between alien symbols: live, feed, sacrifice, return. My knees buckled as the floor tilted. Again, swaying like the deck of a ship caught in a storm. Some of the crew fell, hands clawing at their pins, but no one dared step beyond the circle. Frank gripped my arm so hard I thought he might break it. "Stay inside," he hissed. "If you step out, it counts you." His eyes burned with the desperation of a man who had seen too many people vanish this way. Dev's voice broke into something inhuman, a layered chorus of shrieks and sobs that filled the studio with unbearable resonance. Like standing in the center of 1,000 radios tuned to the same static-filled frequency. My vision blurred at the edges, and I swore I saw the paint itself crawl up his arms, seeping into his veins, branding him from the inside out. The EMTs stood ready but motionless, as if they weren't here to save him, but to witness, their gloves shining under the harsh light. Hobson lifted his hand, and at that gesture the painters stopped, their brushes frozen midair, the last stroke connecting the circle into a perfect seal. The instant it closed, the symbols blazed white-hot, and a sound erupted from Dev's throat. That was not human at all. It was a howl, deep and guttural, vibrating the floor until the bolts in the ceiling rattled and dust fell like snow. The monitors flared, and for a brief, sickening moment, the static faces leaned so close I thought they might spill out into the room, their palms pressing against the inside of the glass. I covered my ears, but it didn't matter, the sound wasn't just in the air, it was in my skull, drilling behind my eyes. Tears ran down my face, hot and uncontrollable. Frank pulled me down onto my knees, his lips moving silently, reciting words I couldn't hear but could feel, like vibrations against my skin. My body shook violently, and I realized everyone around me was trembling too, the crowd swaying in, time with the pulsing glow on the floor. Then, suddenly, silence. The howl cut off mid-breath, leaving only the faint crackle of electricity in our ragged gasps. Dev lay still in the center, oil pooled around him, his chest heaving faintly. For one fragile second, I thought it was over. But then his eyes opened. They weren't his eyes any, more black, endless, reflecting nothing. He sat up slowly, his limbs jerking like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. The camera zoomed closer. Without being touched, the monitors filling with his face. On every screen, his mouth opened, and the words that spilled out weren't his. The feed continues. My stomach dropped into ice. People bowed their heads as though in prayer. Hobson lowered his mic, his face pale but resolute, and whispered the same words. Frank leaned against me, shaking, his voice almost breaking as he echoed them. The feed continues. I couldn't bring myself to speak. My tongue felt sewn to the roof of my mouth, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body rooted to the glowing circle. Dev's body jerked once, twice, and then collapsed again, face first into the pool of black sludge. The lights dimmed, the glyphs dulled to ordinary streaks of vomit and oil, and the monitors flickered back to the regular feed. A weather loop, a traffic cam, meaningless filler. Hobson adjusted his tie, as if we'd just wrapped a routine broadcast. Back to your desks, he said flatly, his voice trembling beneath the command. Bonuses will be processed by Friday. And just like that, people shuffled out, silent and broken, as if none of this had happened. I lingered, staring at Dev's still form, until Frank yanked me by the arm and pulled me into the hallway. Don't look, he said, his voice cracked. With exhaustion, don't you dare look back. I didn't. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere inside the walls, the broadcast was still playing, still feeding, and that every rule I'd been taught was just another way of keeping me on air, until it was finally my turn to be chosen. After the sweepstakes. Nothing at Channel 9 felt the same, though in truth, I think it was me who had changed, because once you watch someone you know turn into a vessel for whatever the hell we were feeding. You stop pretending this place is just a job. For days after Dev's broadcast, the newsroom felt brittle, like the walls were made of paper stretched too thin, ready to tear if you breathed too loud. People went through the motions. Anchors smiled at the camera, weather graphics. Spun on cue, sports highlights rolled like normal but underneath. Everyone's eyes looked hollow, their faces drawn tight with the same silent fear. I kept my pin clipped tighter than ever, rubbing it raw against my skin until I had a welt, repeating the rules under my breath until the words lost meaning. Frank drank more. Sometimes I found him staring at the east windows after sign-off, lips trembling, whispering names I didn't recognize. One night, weeks later, I lingered after my shift, unable to sleep. My body so used to the hum of the station that silence outside felt unbearable. I walked the halls until I found myself back at Studio B, the one place I'd always avoided, the place of the first rule. The red tally light glowed steady above the door, though no broadcast was scheduled. My heart hammered, but I stood frozen, staring at it until I saw movement through the glass. At first I thought it was just my reflection, but then the prompter inside flickered on, scrolling not symbols this time, but clear, sharp English. Welcome back, Terry. My blood turned to ice. My name typed there like someone was speaking directly to me. I stumbled backward, but the glass fogged over as though someone inside had leaned close and breathed against it. The red light brightened, humming. I spun, ready to bolt. But down the hallway, the archive door stood waiting. Its porthole smeared, but this time the smear moved like a hand dragging across from the inside. Fog puffed against the glass in. Long, patient breaths. The building groaned, and faintly, so faintly, I heard the three tones ring out from the Vince bong. Bong bong bump, but softer, like a lullaby just for me. My hand went to my chest instinctively, to my pin, but the weight wasn't there. My breath caught. Oh. I looked down. It lay on the carpet at my feet, the clasp open like a mouth, as if it had unpinned itself. I hadn't felt it fall. My legs shook as I bent to grab it, the air suddenly thick and hot, and when I looked up, the east windows at the end of the hall no longer showed the sleeping city, but a black ocean rising, streetlights bobbing like buoys in the swell. I wanted to shut my eyes, to run, but my body wouldn't move. Somewhere above, a mic crackled to life. Hobson's voice fused with mine, whispering, "Tonight's winner is..." and then the last word came in my own voice, perfectly pitched, perfectly clear, echoing off the hallway walls. My pen burned cold in my palm as the red light over Studio B blazed hunger bright. The archive door shuddered with muffled knocks, and the three tones rang once more, patient and final. And in that moment, I realized the rules hadn't been meant to keep me safe forever. They'd only been meant to keep me alive long enough for my turn to come.